How do you bury a legend? You don't. You laugh at him and wait for him to disappear. He showed up with a board older than most of the riders. No sponsors, no camera crew, just silence. They filmed him, mocked him, and shoved him out of the way. But when he dropped into the slope, the wind changed. The mountain remembered, and every person who laughed would spend the rest of their lives knowing. They watched history and almost missed it. This is not a comeback story. This is a ghost story. With gravity. The snow crunched under old leather boots as Walter Briggs stepped off the shuttle bus and onto the edge of Crystal Crest Ski Resort, a lone figure wrapped in a patched olive parka, with gloves that looked like they belonged to another century and a snowboard slung over his shoulder. Chipped at the edges, faded red, with a thrift-store tag still dangling from one binding. Around him, the resort shimmered in wealth. Sleek jackets, mirrored goggles, designer gear strapped to SUVs parked beside roaring fire pits. A group of 20-somethings in bright helmets laughed as they zoomed past him, one glancing back and muttering, "Lost Grandpa alert." Walter said nothing. He walked slowly but with purpose toward the lodge, the cold air cutting across his weathered cheeks, eyes sharp beneath the bill of his wool cap. Inside, music pulsed softly under the chatter of influencers, vacationers, and elite ski bums comparing custom boards and bragging about vertical drop times. As Walter approached the front desk to ask about the open competition happening that afternoon, the young receptionist looked up and blinked in visible confusion. Her eyes dropped to the old man's cracked boots, then to the snowboard in his hand. Faded, crooked, and completely out of place in a room full of carbon fiber edges and digital boot heaters. "Sir, the senior spa is that way," she said gently, gesturing to the left. Walter's voice came low but steady. "I'm here to register for the downhill freestyle." Behind him, someone laughed. With that thing, another voice chimed in. Walter turned, eyes locking onto a circle of snowboarders in matching team jackets. One of them, wearing a GoPro and a smug grin, held up his phone and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll film the wipeout." Walter didn't respond. He simply signed the waiver, slid the form back across the counter, and walked toward the lift, each step slow, steady, unshaken, as if the mountain had already heard his name and was just waiting for his return. Walter stood near the base of the lift, tightening the worn straps on his board with movements that were deliberate, quiet, and invisible to the crowd around him. The snow glistened under a cobalt sky, and the sound of laughter sliced through the cold like wind off the ridge. "Hey, old-timer, where'd you dig that thing up?" "Your attic?" a voice called out, too loud to be casual. A group of brightly dressed snowboarders snickered, all teeth and ego, their boards lined up like weapons with sponsor logos and chrome detail. Walter glanced once, didn't answer. "Maybe he's filming a retro documentary," another quipped, pulling out his phone and hitting record. The caption appeared within seconds, "Snowboard Dinosaur, Grandpa V's Gravity." Others nearby leaned in to see. The video showed Walter fumbling with his left glove. Just once. But they looped it anyway, turning it into a GIF with laughing emojis. One teen girl leaned against her boyfriend and said, "This is going to be brutal," at the check-in tent. The coordinator hesitated when Walter handed her his confirmation card. "You sure you're in the right division?" "Sir, these runs are advanced." Walter nodded once. "I know." She looked him up and down. "All right, your number's 47. Just be careful." Nearby, Dax hollerin'. The reigning resort golden boy and social media icon with 3 million followers. Watched the scene unfold. He adjusted his reflective goggles and said to his entourage, "Let him ride. The wipeout alone will get us 10,000 likes." One of his friends grinned. "Bet he won't even make it to the first curve." Walter clipped into his board slowly, testing each binding with silent precision, as if tuning an instrument no one else could hear. The mountain loomed above, white and silent, its trails carved with lines of competition, glory, and arrogance. But Walter wasn't looking at them. He was looking up at a point near the summit, an untouched stretch of snow just off the official course. No one noticed it. No one cared, except him. And the moment he leaned into his first push toward the lift, the wind seemed to rise just a little. like something old had awakened beneath the ice. At the top of the slope, where the air thinned and the crowd thickened, Walter stepped off the lift and slid his board into the snow with a soft scrape. Around him, competitors stretched, posed, and joked as drone cameras hovered nearby, live streaming warm-ups for thousands below. Dax Halloran struck a pose beside a Red Bull banner, flashing peace signs and flexing like a performer before the curtain rose. "Watch me bury this fossil," he said into his mic, grinning as the crowd below roared. Walter moved slowly toward the edge of the warm-up run. His coat was too long, his board too scratched, and his posture too upright for anyone to take seriously. He crouched low, adjusted his boots, and pushed off. For a moment, he glided clean, until a sharp patch of ice caught his edge. His board jerked. He stumbled, arms flailing for half a second before regaining balance. But the crowd had already decided. Gasps turned to laughter. Called it, someone yelled. Phones lit up. A new video posted instantly. Grandpa eats snow trying to ride Black Diamond. The slope's loudspeaker crackled, and someone on the mic chuckled. "Let's get the paramedics ready." This might get spicy. Walter stood still, brushing the frost from his gloves. A young ski patrol officer slid up beside him. "Sir, maybe you should stick to the green trails today. We don't want anyone getting hurt." "I'm not hurt," Walter replied. "Not yet," the officer muttered, shaking his head as he slid away. At the edge of the viewing platform, a group of teens burst out laughing when someone tossed a cheap plastic walker into the snow with mock concern. "He might need this at the bottom," they howled. But what no one noticed, no one except one lone maintenance worker named Eli, was the way Walter examined the trail after his fall, the way his boots shifted slightly, the way his eyes scanned the horizon, not in panic, but in calculation. Eli leaned over to a coworker. "That guy didn't look like an amateur," he whispered. "That was a correction." His friend shrugged. "Whatever. He'll be off the mountain in 20 seconds. Down below, the crowd buzzed with energy. The scoreboard blinked. Dax's music blared. And Walter Briggs, stoic, quiet, humiliated, picked up his Thrift-Store board again, climbed back up without a word, and waited for the mountain to call his name. As the wind whispered across the ridge and spectators crowded closer to the edge of the viewing platform, Walter stood alone near the starting gate, tightening the fraying strap of his left boot, his breath rising slow and steady in the icy air. Down below, announcers bantered over loudspeakers, filling the silence with noise and sarcasm. Next up, competitors number 47, Dax Walter Briggs, probably here to relive a midlife crisis, or a late life one, the voice cracked, drawing a ripple of laughter. But at the side of the lodge, half hidden behind the equipment tent, a mechanic named Eli Warner froze as he heard the name. He pulled out his phone and tapped frantically. "No way, no freaking way," he muttered. He zoomed in on the screen. A yellowed image from a 1977 sports magazine. There, frozen in time, was a black and white photo of a younger man in a flannel coat midair over a mountain ridge, his board tilted with perfect form, his face wild and focused. The headline read, "Walter Lightning Line, Briggs, the ghost of Glacier Ridge." Eli's heart skipped. He looked up, same stance, same fire in the eyes, just older, weathered, still unmistakable. He burst from behind the tent, ran toward the volunteer tent shouting, "You guys are laughing at a legend." One of the other staffers rolled their eyes. Eli shoved his phone in the guy's face. He held the downhill speed record at 3 resorts in 2 countries. No sponsors, no coach, just him and the board, until his son died in that avalanche in '82. He disappeared after that. Word spread like sparks. A few older skiers started murmuring, "Wait, that is him. I remember watching him. He carved with no fear. He disappeared like a ghost." The crowd's tone shifted. Whispers turned reverent. The same teens who laughed now stared at their phones, jaws tightening as they read his past Olympic qualifier, rescue volunteer, hero. The live chat on the resort's video feed exploded. "Is this real? Walter Briggs is back." That's the guy my dad used to tell stories about. Up on the hill, Walter's name was called again. This time, without jokes, just silence. Then, a single clap from the bass. Then more. Hesitant, growing, building. Dax Holleran, still smug in his custom thermal gear, turned to his crew. You're all acting like this guy matters. But his voice faltered, because deep down, even he could feel it. Something had shifted. The mountain wasn't laughing anymore. Walter stepped toward the start gate with his Thrift-Store board tucked under one arm, the same faded jacket flapping slightly in the wind. And for the first time all day, no one laughed. The crowd was shifting. Uncertainty replacing arrogance, silence replacing mockery. Even the announcer, who had earlier cracked jokes over the loudspeaker, now spoke with a cautious weight. Up next, competitor 47, Walter Briggs. Behind him, Dax Holleran tightened the strap on his $800 goggles and muttered, "This is ridiculous. Let him take his little victory lap. Then I'll show everyone how the real pros ride." His voice lacked conviction now, thinned by doubt. Down near the lift station, a ski tech pulled up the resort record archive. There it was, etched in digital gold, fastest downhill descent, Crystal Crest, Walter Briggs, 1:39, 82, 1979, unbroken, for over 4 decades. This can't be real, someone whispered. But Eli, standing with arms crossed and eyes sharp, just nodded. Watch. Walter fastened his boots, knelt beside the board, and ran a hand down its battered edge like he was greeting an old friend. Not a piece of gear, no logos, no carbon fiber, just wood, steel, memory. He stood, looked once toward the peak, then toward the horizon, as if measuring something no one else could see. The starter gave a nervous thumbs up. Ready? Walter didn't answer. He just lowered his goggles, bent his knees, and leaned in. The beeping countdown began. 3, 2, 1. And the gates snapped open. Walter launched forward with zero hesitation, dropping into the steep slope like he'd never left it, his body folding into the terrain with terrifying ease. The snow beneath his board didn't fight him. It obeyed. Each turn was etched into the mountain with the precision of a master sculptor. No wasted motion, no flash, just ferocity disguised as flow. The crowd watched, mouths agape. He was flying, not just fast, but elegant, like the laws of physics had been rewritten for his return. Even the wind seemed to part for him. The timer on the big screen raced forward. 1:35, 1:36, 1:37. Dax leaned in, jaw tight, eyes wide. The last corner approached, a drop that had sent dozens tumbling throughout the day. Walter didn't flinch. He crouched lower, let gravity take him, and cut through the final gate like a knife through silk. The clock blinked red, then froze. 1:38, 99, gasps became roars. The mountain, his mountain, erupted. He had done the unthinkable. At 68 years old, with a thrift shop board and the weight of a forgotten name, Walter Briggs had broken his own record. And in that moment, every whisper of doubt, every laugh, every condescending glance was buried under fresh snow and left behind in his wake. The finish line was silent for half a breath. Then it shattered. A wave of gasps broke across the mountain, followed by an eruption of disbelief. Then cheers. Then something that felt like awe. Phones dropped. Jaws hung. A child near the barriers whispered, "Is he even real?" Walter stood still at the bottom, snow dust swirling around his boots, his breathing calm, unrushed, as if he hadn't just bent time to his will. The scoreboard blinked again. 1:38, 99, and next to it, new record, up on the ridge. Dax Holleran's smirk cracked into something colder, harder. He yanked off his goggles. He got lucky. He barked. That was a fluke run. Wind must have been behind him. His team stayed quiet. They had watched every turn, every inch of the descent. That wasn't luck. That was legacy. Reporters pushed toward Walter, shouting questions, but he waved them off. walking past the cameras like they weren't there. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. His silence roared louder than any podium speech. Back at the top, Dax stormed to the gate. "Start the clock," he growled. "Let's end this fairy tale." The announcers hesitated. A marshal asked, "You sure you're ready?" "Hit it," Dax snapped. The gate slammed open and he took off like a bullet, carving hard, flinging powder behind him, chasing a ghost he never believed was real. Halfway down the slope, Dax cut too tight, trying to mimic Walter's inside line. His edge clipped ice. His board wobbled. He leaned forward, winged too far. 1 second he was flying. The next, he was tumbling, head over heels, arms flailing, skis scattering across the slope. Gasps rose from the crowd. Medics rushed in. Dax lay in the snow, dazed, not broken, but bruised in the one place that wouldn't heal fast. His pride, cameras swarmed. Comment sections flooded. Walter didn't just win. He erased him. That crash. That was karma carved in snow. At the lodge, Walter sat alone near a fireplace, sipping cocoa from a paper cup. Eli approached, breathless. "You just rewrote the story of this entire mountain." Walter didn't look up. He stared into the flames. "No," he said quietly. "I just reminded it who I was." The ski patrol's snowmobile whined down the slope, pulling a rescue sled behind it. And on that sled sat Dax Halloran. Helmet cracked, pride shattered, eyes wide open but vacant as the realization hit him. The mountain had not just humbled him, it had chosen someone else. Spectators didn't cheer or pity. They watched in stunned silence, some with cameras still rolling, others lowering their phones, ashamed they'd once laughed at the man who carved truth into ice. Inside the lodge, Dax sat slumped on a bench, his ankle wrapped, his ego burning. His agent stood nearby, phone pressed to his ear. "Red Bull just called," the agent whispered. "They're pulling the endorsement. Too much heat. Too much comparison." Dax turned slowly toward the window where Walter stood on the snow, surrounded now. Not by reporters or fans, but by ski instructors, elders, even a few stunned teens asking for tips, not selfies. Meanwhile, resort management scrambled. The marketing director, who had once rolled her eyes at Walter's registration, now clutched a press kit. "He's not just a legend," she muttered. "He's a brand story." Her boss paled. Get him to speak, offer him a deal, offer him anything. But Walter didn't care about deals. He stood near the slope, watching children practice wide, clumsy S-turns, nodding gently at every fall, every awkward start. A boy no older than 10 walked up, clutching a snowboard nearly taller than himself. "Mr. Briggs?" he asked shyly. Walter knelt, eye to eye. "Call me Walter." The boy smiled. "Was that really you on the mountain?" Walter glanced at the peaks. It still is. Behind them, Eli approached with a battered manila envelope. "I dug this out of the archives," he said, handing it over. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Yellowed with time, avalanche hero quit snowboarding after tragedy. Hull says he'll never ride again. Beneath it, a black and white photo of Walter. 30 years younger, eyes filled with grief. "They said you saved 3 lives that day," Eli murmured, "but you lost your son." Walter stared at the photo. "I didn't lose him on the mountain," he said softly. "I lost him in the silence afterward. I stopped writing. I stopped remembering." He folded the paper gently and placed it in his coat. But today, I heard him again. In the wind, the fire that had once been buried beneath years of pain now glowed steady. Walter had returned. Not for fame, not for redemption, but to answer the only voice that ever truly mattered, his own. As the sun dipped behind the jagged white peaks and shadows stretched long across the snow, Walter sat alone at the edge of the quiet slope, the world behind him still buzzing with headlines and hashtags. But up here, the mountain returned to stillness. The wind carried the sound of distant laughter from the lodge, but Walter's focus was on the letter now resting in his gloved hands, a letter worn soft with time, its corners frayed, its ink faded, but the handwriting unmistakable. If you ever find your way back to these slopes, ride one last time for me. Remind them what grace looks like, not for trophies, not for records, but for the rhythm only you in the snow ever understood. Ray Lancaster, his best friend, the man who'd built the Crystal Crest Resort from nothing but powder and ambition, the man who had stood by him through every run until cancer took him before the first snowfall of '99. Walter folded the letter slowly, eyes misting, not from cold, but from memory. "You built this place for people like them," Walter whispered, glancing back at the lodge. "But you saved it for people like me." Suddenly, soft footsteps approached. A teenage girl in borrowed snow pants and mismatched gloves. Her cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked hesitant, but determined. "Are you Mr. Briggs?" Walter turned, surprised. "Yes." She held up a photograph. Two boys, arms around each other, both grinning in front of a wooden cabin buried in snow. "My dad is Owen Bell," she said. "He told me you once saved his life in an avalanche. Said if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Walter took the photo gently, his thumb tracing the edge of the image. "Owen," he murmured. "He was just a kid." The girl nodded. "He used to say you rode like you were part of the mountain. He wanted me to tell you that he never forgot. None of us did." Walter looked out toward the empty trail again. His eyes weren't misty anymore. They were sharp, clear, alive. "Tell him," he said, standing slowly. "I never forgot either." He looked down at the board at his side. "It took me a while to listen again, but the mountain never stopped calling." And for the first time in decades, Walter smiled. Not with sadness, not with pride, but with peace, because the ghosts weren't chasing him anymore. They were waiting. And now, he was ready to ride with them again. Before the lifts groaned to life and before the sun melted the night's frost from the rails, Walter was already there. Standing at the edge of the beginner's slope, breath fogging the air, hands wrapped around a steaming tin cup, his battered Thrift-Store board propped beside him like a companion rather than a tool. The mountain was silent, golden light bleeding across the ridges, casting long shadows that stretched like old memories. Down the path came the girl from the night before, Owen Bell's daughter, wearing mismatched gloves and a jacket too big for her frame, her steps careful but steady, like someone chasing a whisper she wasn't sure she heard right. Walter nodded at her, picked up the board, and walked slowly to meet her, halfway. "Ever ridden something that remembers more than you do?" he asked, eyes soft. She looked at the board, dented, scratched, stained by time, and back at him. "That's yours," she said. "It was," he replied, "but maybe now it's just waiting for the right hands." Her voice was barely a breath. "I've only ridden twice. I don't know what I'm doing." Walter crouched, adjusting the bindings like a craftsman tuning a violin. "Neither did I when I started, neither did anyone. But this board, it forgives. It teaches. It listens." He stood, held it out to her. "Ride it. And don't worry about falling. That's how it knows you're trying." She took it like it might break in her fingers. But it didn't. It felt right. She strapped in, hesitated, then pushed off. Awkward at first, arms out, too stiff, but something clicked in her second turn. Not speed, not grace, just commitment. The crowd at the edge of the slope watched, first with polite curiosity, then quiet respect. One instructor whispered, "That board's teaching her." Eli stood beside them, arms crossed, smiling like he'd just seen a story begin. But Walter didn't stay to watch. He turned away before she even reached the bottom. No fanfare, no farewell. Just slow, steady steps down the gravel path, hands in his coat pockets, boots crunching softly in snow. Someone called after him, but he didn't look back. He didn't need to, because legacy isn't loud. It doesn't wave flags or wait for applause. It leaves quietly, knowing it left something better behind. The sun dipped low behind Crystal Crest, casting the slopes in golden fire as the day's last riders carved gentle arcs into the snow. But Walter was already gone, No press conference, no spotlight, no encore, just a pair of deep boot prints leading away from the resort's edge, down a quiet forest trail that only he seemed to know existed. Inside the lodge, the leaderboard blinked one final time. His name, Walter Briggs, now etched in bold beside the new record, time 1:38:99. But no one looked at the screen. They were all at the window, watching the girl on the beginner slope take another run. Demboof, this time faster, more fluid, more fearless. The Thrift-Store board danced beneath her feet like it belonged to her now. At the far end of the lodge, Eli stepped up to the wall of photos, portraits of champions, influencers, celebrities, and slipped a new one into the empty frame beside them, an old black and white image of a young Walter, airborne over Glacier Ridge, fire in his eyes. Beneath it, he scrawled in marker, he came back not to win, but to remind the mountain who it belonged to. Outside, in the stillness, Walter paused at the tree line and turned his head, not toward the mountain, but toward the soft laughter echoing behind him. A small smile touched his lips. Then he kept walking, no crowd, no glory. Just winded his back and peace under his boots. They thought he was a joke, a relic, a nobody. But legends don't speak in interviews. They speak in seconds shaved from time. He didn't raise a fist. He raised the mountain. Now his name lives on the scoreboard. And in their shame, if this story haunted you, good, because silence doesn't mean weakness. It means someone is about to make the world remember what real power looks like. And the next time you laugh at someone standing alone, pray it's not Walter Briggs.